Okay, hello again, everybody. Welcome to the Murmurations podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Ben Lamb, a senior lecturer at Teesside University. Morning, Ben.
Hello.
Ben, you'll get that reference in a minute, everybody. Ben's teaching and research specialises in media, history and social class, and he's going to talk today about social class and the welfare state in relation to his research and teaching. So, this is the second episode of Murmurations podcast, and Ben's got a little job today because I'm learning on the job, and I noticed in the first podcast that I kept spinning around on my chair and never looking at the screen and wobbling the camera when I was taking notes and all sorts. So Ben can shout at me if I'm doing any annoying things. I'm going to try and stay still this time. But yeah. Some of you might recognise Ben as somebody that I've frequently wound up on Facebook and beaten many times at FIFA and all those other fun things. But we're going to try and be sensible today and have a good chat. So, how you doing, Ben?
Good, thanks. It's funny you're talking about your room. I've got like a light bulb just above my head, so hopefully it looks like I've got constant ideas, although the light bulb isn't switched on, so
that's a good metaphor to start with.
It just shows how I'm full of shit constantly.
Ah, brilliant.
We were supposed to furnish this room, but then lockdown happened, so I'm just in a bare room, like a padded sort of cell where I'm thinking, are my ideas actually producing anything of worth? But hopefully we'll find out today.
Yeah. Well, this poster behind me, it's completely deliberate. I just couldn't handle at the start of lockdown when we all started having meetings. I couldn't handle the fact that I had nothing but a magnolia wall behind me. So yeah. I put something up to try and make me look like a vaguely exciting, interesting person. We are going to talk about quite a few things today. What I want to start with is a conversation about your book.
Mm-hmm.
So you've just published a book called, here it is, You're Nicked, which is about British television series about police. Give us a couple of examples of different time periods where those television programs really reflect something about the society in which they're appearing. So the context in which they appear and the time and place in which they're shown.
Sure. So I'd probably start with the 1960s, really. So the most popular series then in Britain was Z-Cars. And a quarter of the world's population were watching every night that it was broadcast. And what's interesting about Z-Cars is that I think it reflects the progressive mindset of general society at the time. So if we applied criminological theory to Z-Cars, it was really invested in deviant subculture theory, which falls under the umbrella of the predestined actor model in criminology. And effectively, what that series is saying is that criminals aren't all evil. We need to have this societal debate as to what societal pressures push somebody into committing crime. So it can be a number of things. And deviant subculture theory is this idea that you have people at the lower end of society who don't have the same opportunities as the middle and upper class people, and often the reason people commit crime is because they're told that you, as part of the society, you have to aspire to achieve all these things like the house, the car, because obviously consumerism starts to become an important aspect of 1960s life and culture. You need to buy all these cultural amenities, yet people at the bottom of the ladder don't have the resources or the know-how or the means with which to achieve them. So often people can cause crime as a result of resentment or as a way of achieving success. So it's really and Z-Cars is a good series in that way. It was also Brian Blessed's first ever acting role as one of the police officers, which is a good fact for you. But yeah, it's trying to play out this cultural criminological debate, because in the 1960s there was a really important social study that was published called The Rediscovery of Poverty, which showed that actually a lot of people in society were living in poverty. When the definition got changed to relative poverty, that was a huge difference. Before the 1960s, poverty was just measured in terms of whether you had enough money to eat, basically, and your physical condition. Whereas in the 60s, it gets changed to, well, you know what, you're actually living in relative poverty if you don't have enough money for a washing machine, if you don't have enough money to go to the cinema, you're not a part of society. So
social participation, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then another example would be the 70s, where it completely changes. In the 1970s, and I think that's probably, I think we're quite a conservative, with a small c, culture in Britain, and I think a large part of that is because of law and order policy in the 70s. So in the 70s, you have The Sweeney, which is a series that a lot of people are probably familiar with, and that really adopts the rational actor model of criminology, which is the idea that the way in which you solve crime is you give offenders the harshest penalty possible, you clamp down hard as soon as possible, and that should wipe out crime in society. Treat all criminals as totally and wholly responsible for what they've done. Treat them as harshly as possible, and that's what happens in The Sweeney. And it's effectively, it's an action series, and it was shot on film cameras in colour, and it's all about the thrill of the chase. And there's really one interesting episode where you find out a guy's committed armed robbery to pay for an operation for his sick child, and you think, oh, maybe that's trying to say something complex here. But at the end of the episode, you find out he was a horrible father. He commits crime just for the hell of it, and it's not really willing to have that debate. So I think those 2 decades are quite are really evocative of what was going on.
That's really interesting, because it's sometimes difficult to try and talk about crime or people in those contexts. So the idea that people are products of the society in which they live, it's often confused as making excuses for criminality or trying to excuse away things that are wrong, rather than what it's really trying to do, which is understand the reasons. Not to say that people don't have any responsibility, because they do, but there are many reasons why people do a lot of the things that they do, especially when we look at in relation to addiction and things like that as well.
Yeah, of course.
On the point about social class, I just wanted to move on to another project that you did recently called Rewinding the Welfare State. So if I remember rightly, Rewinding the Welfare State was an archival film that looked back at the ways in which representations of the welfare state in previous was it media campaigns or in the press, or what? Could you just talk a bit about that project? Just tell us what it involved.
Yeah, so putting my historical hat on, whenever you read histories of the welfare state, I often found that you get 2 things. You either get a very national narrative about this law was introduced and this is what happened across the country, or you can get pockets of regional studies of how the introduction of a welfare state and its changes over the years may have impacted a specific town or community or region. But I think regional television and regional films and audiovisual content which may have been produced regionally by unions or businesses or whatever have always played a vital part of that debate. So what I did was I worked closely with the North East Film Archive that are actually based at Teesside University, and they have all sorts of interesting collections. They have local films, they have the ITV, and they have the ITV Time Tease stuff, and that ranging from documentaries to information films to news broadcasts, and showing you exactly how it was debated and what was important to local communities. So what I did was I put together what I thought. Well, I went through all their vaults and their archives, and I put together what I hoped was a compelling narrative, and just approached as many towns as I could throughout the Northeast. So I managed to tour it to about 15 different towns. 15 different venues in a number of different towns throughout the region, ranging from independent cinemas, museums, art centres, and it was fascinating. I got a range of different audiences, from up to 115 people to 10 people in a library. But overall, I managed to interest and sell about 800 tickets in total. So it does really resonate, and I think the reason for that is every show was different. So I had an overall narrative, which was that rather than just say, oh, this happened in the 1940s and then this has happened, which is sort of what Ken Loach's Spirit of 45 does, and it's almost like a done to death narrative if you just do it chronologically. So what I did was I structured it around a person's life. So I started, how it works, it's sort of like a lecture but with long clips, and it works really well. So you can't really tour archival footage, I would say, without some sort of context and curation and saying this is important, made in this way, and I'm going to take you on this history, and I'm going to take out clips, because if you just put a show reel together without talking, you don't really people don't necessarily stay focused on know what they're looking for, because a lot of archival footage it doesn't really make any sense. It can be that old and just on its own. So how it was structured was, it was through a person's life. So the first part of the film, we look at the NHS, which is obviously when you first come into the world. It's through the hospital infrastructure in this country. Then I look at schooling, which people often forget as being part of the welfare state. That it's the state's responsibility to educate you and give you the best possible start in life. Then I look at housing as well, which the state still has a responsibility to give you a home. I then look at work and benefits. And retirement as well. So I thought let's take the journey of somebody's life rather than just chronological 1930s to now, and how it's different. And it worked really well, actually. I think people really respond to that, but also each show was different. So I would go into regional archives from that particular town or county and just pepper it with like really specific humanistic stories.
But that's what's important, what you just said there, the human element. Because when you were explaining this, I was thinking, yes, the narrative element and the curation is really important. And that curation helps guide the audience through. But giving it that personalised context, that really points to the time and place of the audience you're talking to. I think that's really important. And as well, it's just disrupting this narrative that we often hear about the welfare state. People will immediately want to jump to, oh well, this. I agree with the welfare state, but there's too many benefit cheats, and it's immediately talked about in these ways, and we don't actually think about it in terms of other examples that you've just given, which are so many things that we take for granted as well, right through from the in life in the NHS, although the conversation around the NHS is obviously changing now. Go on, sorry.
I was just going to say that was really important to its success as well. I wasn't being a social justice warrior. There was no political, with a capital P, ideological agenda. I was being true to as history as possible, saying this legislation occurred and it resulted in these tangible changes to society, which we can see in these films, which people are talking about, and there was clearly a change at this point, this, that, and the other. So, it didn't matter whether, people forget the post-war settlement established in the 1940s was the idea, no matter which political party you remember of, or whatever political party happened to be in government, it still had a duty to provide people with these basic human rights. And it doesn't matter whether it was Ramsay Butler's 1944 Education Act. He was a Tory MP who believed that people in this country deserved a decent standard of education, no matter what their class or creed. And it doesn't matter whether it was Nye Bevan's 1946 National Health Service Act. That meant we could access healthcare. The quality of healthcare didn't depend on how rich we were. It was a cross-party mission, which starts to get slowly unravelled.
So how did people at the shows that you're making you sound like a superstar now, rocking around in the Northeast?
My world tour.
When you went on your tour, how did people respond? Were there any negative audience responses? Did you have anyone having a go at you and calling you a dirty little socialist?
No, that which was fascinating actually. I think people just responded to to the personal stories, and a lot of people seeing sort of people they might have known, or the town that they're from in a previous.
Were they surprised? Time. Were they surprised by some of the stuff that you drew attention to?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose I'm sure, because there was like a question and answer session at the end of each one, and no one ever said, oh, this is a socialist agenda or anything like that. I think people recognise that they use these services and have depended on these services at many stages in their life, through the hard working life that they've had.
Yeah. I think that's great that general audiences as well attended, in whether it was 10 or 150 or whatever.
Yeah,
I think it's really good because it sort of it breaks down that myth that academics are off with their head in the clouds, coming up with crazy, wacky theories and doing pointless analysis and stuff in ways that nobody can relate to or connect with or understand. It's just, obviously, we know that's not true, and people don't give mainstream audiences enough credit, to be honest. They'll engage with a lot more than I think people commonly acknowledge.
Yeah,
I just felt that on the ground during your tour.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell a really interesting story and show what communities have been through and why it's important. Why it's important to have that debate. So it was a good way of actually bringing people together. I would say, I don't know people's political allegiances were. It was just the questions tended to be more about they wanted to know more facts. Really, I wanted to know more about the research journey I've gone on and all sorts.
It shows as well why archival material is so important too.
Yeah,
especially when we've got that sector has been really, the museum sector and has been, the cultural sector more broadly has been really hit badly by current circumstances, and it's something we really need to protect and keep maintaining the kind of those archives and access to the archives. Is really important. It's another thing that we could really, something really precious that we could lose if we let it slip off our radar. I'm conscious of time, so we've still got some time left. I was just going to ask you, in terms of the region-specific stuff, recently you've done something about Ridley Scott. I didn't realise that Ridley Scott grew up in the northeast and actually grew up really close to where you live.
Yeah.
Do you want to just briefly tell us about that? Do you want to tell us about the Ridley Scott stuff?
Yeah, I'm basically just publishing an article on. I want to. How do I put this? So yeah, Ridley Scott is often, people are slightly aware he's British, but he's just, if you say the word Ridley Scott, people just think of one of the world's most successful Hollywood film directors, having made Alien, Gladiator, and all the rest of it, Blade Runner. Whereas actually, he's a northeastern lad. Grew up in Stockton, and I think his it fits to the welfare state really well. Actually, he comes from very humble beginnings. His dad worked was a shipping merchant. Right. Ridley Scott was due to go on national service in the 1950s, and his dad actually said, "Do you know what? You're really good at drawing. You're going to take up this scholarship and go to the Hartlepool Art College, which is now the Northern School of Art." He did a year there, succeeded, then got a scholarship to go to the Royal College of Art in London, and then he couldn't have got to where he is without this state subsidised assistance. And if you think there's probably Ridley Scott out there now on the same street with the same humble beginnings who won't necessarily have the help and aid they need to be as successful. So, but the purpose of my article, it's not a social justice warrior point. I just think it fits back into what all my research interests are quite nicely. If you read any scholarship on Ridley Scott, in a nutshell, it says, anything. We don't need to look at what he made as a young man and the experimental films he did and his early work as a young man at BBC. Let's just start this study with his first film, The Duelist, or his second film, Alien, and see how his authorial signature has developed. Whereas I say, actually, hang on, let's take a step back. Ideologically, his stuff is very social realist. It might not look it, but with his background, the people he lived with, and he worked with he had the same sort of journey in his earlier years that Ken Loach did, but they're completely different filmmakers, but there's still a similar ideological ideas there. And also his sort of visual iconography comes as a result of his early education and the work he did at the BBC. So this obsession with the uncanny, the point of view shot, that's something that is developed in his earlier years that we need to revisit and look back on and see, oh, well, actually, you know, his student film Boy on Bicycle, there's a lot of similarity to his view of politics, the human condition that we see in Blade Runner. So I look at that journey, and hopefully I changed the debate in the understanding of Ridley Scott as a filmmaker.
That's incredible, though, that you can take something that we're so familiar with on the big screen, your big, spectacular, as big as it gets Hollywood blockbuster, and then you can break down elements and go right back to the regional and personal and domestic roots of the director and see that context there in his earliest work that also relates to his social background and all of that stuff. That's incredible. And just also, I think that story as well, of just being aware of how the little bits of luck and fate in life can just have, like, that are beyond our control, can be so significant to our circumstances. Like his dad's decision to say, you can't get a drawing, or whatever it was.
It actually surprised Ridley as well, because his dad was, like, you know, fought in the war, was very much a disciplinarian, or, you know, old-fashioned type of dad, and he was expecting his dad to say, it's time you go in the military, son, whereas actually his dad said, no, you've got to follow your passion and dreams, and which could have been. He said he bases all the strong women in his films on his mother as well, who was a very strong-willed woman who may have played a part in that as well. So it is fascinating, and I think you're right. I want to say something about fate as well. I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of luck features in all these things. So I think there's a really important parallel between the Jarrow Crusade in the 1930s and the hunger marches that took place in this country, where people, working men, marched the breadth of the country to demonstrate about how they didn't have enough money to eat despite working. And the reason the Jarrow Crusade got a lot of sympathetic national coverage, and is still a demonstration we talk about today, which obviously has regional roots here, is because randomly a stray black Labrador joined the march out of nowhere. And that really sort of pulled people's heartstrings, and thousands of people wrote in offering to adopt the dog, which I find fascinating. And I think there's almost an element with Marcus Rashford's campaign, actually. The fact that all these different factors needed to come into place at the right time for it to really grab people's attention. Like the Jarrow Crusade, it wasn't aligned to any political party, any social justice warrior campaign or anything. It was just like the Jarrow marchers who walked from Jarrow to London. He's just an honest bloke with humble beginnings who says, you know what, children shouldn't go hungry. And for some reason, that's resonated and cut through all the political personality politics and infighting and bullshit, and like you said there was a lot of that going on in the 1930s. We should remember as well. You know, you were in the 1930s. You were either a hard-working, to a large degree, you were a hard-working Tory or a radical communist going on these hunger marches. It was a very similar political climate then. People had to make a decision: did they want a socially responsible form of capitalism with state assistance? Or did they want fascism? And that was a question being asked throughout Europe. It was being asked then, and I do think it's being asked now. And it just takes the right sort of campaign with a degree of luck, with someone understanding how the media works, and they can just cut through it. And Marcus Rashford, the Jarrow Crusaders, managed.
Well, and also pointing to personal circumstances that can be beyond our control. That creating that empathy, I think empathy is so important. And I think the Rashford stuff is connected because it's however or whatever the reasons are for it, there is, people seem to have an empathy with the fact that people are living in circumstances that aren't their fault. And too often when we have this very individualist way of talking about personal circumstances. It's either you're either blamed because it's your own fault for not trying hard enough to pull yourself out of difficult circumstances, or no element of luck is acknowledged at all if you're in a good position where things have, you've worked hard, but equally things have gone your way, or you've not faced the kind of challenges that other people face. There's a Carl Jung quote. He said the greatest burden a child will carry is the unlived life of its parents. And the Ridley Scott thing you said really resonated with that, because I think both in positive and negative ways, we can't change the circumstances we're born into, and equally, whilst unfortunate things happen, I think that was a really positive example of the way in which somebody who didn't have opportunities themselves didn't just say to their child, just go through the path I did. They saw their own lack of opportunity and pushed him in a different direction. So it's really interesting. I was going to ask you just to finish up on a general kind of open question. Why is it important then that we, as part of media and culture, that we continue to scrutinise and analyse and study the film and television?
I just think it's absolutely central to our existence, and we need to understand it and how it works, and also teach some creativity and play our own part in it. I felt like I was facilitating a lot of conversations and enhancing people's understanding of history just by finding something in an archive. I suppose, the media, it's our first point of call for understanding absolutely everything that's going on around us, be it politics, science. Usually if there's a scientific discovery, or if there's a news story that's happened that's important, the way in which we understand it is disseminated through some sort of media platform, and that has a really important and all-encompassing part to play in how we read and understand our position in the world, and an understanding of that, I think, is central and key to our existence as a species, as a people, as a nation.
And the way in which the stories we tell are reflective of the societies in which they're told. So I think we're out of time, but thank you for. I was going to get Daisy to say hello to you, and she wanted to, but she's run off now, so she missed the chance. And we've got to go and feed our hens. So we got 12 hens yesterday, so we need to go and feed them.
Cool.
So I'll love you and leave you. Thank you, Benjamin, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.